Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Existential Hope podcast. We're really delighted today to have Aaron Stupple here. And this is an interview that I've been pushing for a lot,
Hmm.
partly for reasons that I'll explain to in a second. But in a nutshell, I'm really excited that you're here. I'm sad that we missed each other at the Radfest and Rationalist Summit. But I think that the type of philosophy that you guys are operating in is very close to home for me. I've studied at the Poppers department of philosophy at the London School of Economics, and
Oh, wow.
then have been deeply ingrained in the Deutschian, Popperian approach to rationality as the use of reasons, falsifications, etc. Like things that are all not new to you, but perhaps to some podcast listeners. We've had David Deutsch on also for a podcast, I think 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Dive more into that, they can. But I think one thing that you've done, which was super interesting, is really taken that philosophy and that philosophy that has also shaped much of Deutsch's taking children seriously approach and really applied it rigorously to your own life and to the life of
Yeah.
your kids. And so I'm super excited to get into that because I've been following even the Taking Children Seriously blogs, etc. But I always thought, could I actually apply that to me in practice? And now I have to answer that question because I'm due in 6 weeks, which means
Whoa.
a very present topic for me. So when I
Congratulations.
thank you. When I saw you published a book on this, I got very excited. A, because it's locally very relevant for me, but also B, because I actually hadn't heard of someone firsthand from their experience of like how this philosophy actually applies. And I had always thought hand wavingly that I would try this out, but now the rubber hits the road. And then
Wow.
I'm really excited to also get into a bit like zooming out, perhaps with Beatrice later, like why is child rearing so important for the long-term future and our civilization's place within it, and why is this a really good philosophy to follow? Anyway, this is a bunch of topics I would love to cover.
Wonderful.
It sounds good.
Sounds excellent.
Okay, perhaps you kick us off. I already know, I feel like I know you intimately through having read the book, but perhaps for those that don't, do you want to kick us off a little bit with like, how did you get to really applying these principles into your life? What got you started on this journey? And yeah, then we can get into the philosophy a little bit.
Yeah, it was a bit maybe relevant for your audience. I spent some time with various future-oriented schools of thought. I got really excited about Ray Kurzweil around 2007 and went in hard, and that's what drove me to go to get into medicine. And then I followed Aubrey Gray quite a bit and worked with him. And then I got into effective altruism and have really just enjoyed and felt a connection to questions about the long-term future and philosophy. And I've always been reading stuff, but it didn't really change my life all that much. In fact, when I was dabbling with transhumanism and immortalism and stuff like that, I always felt this disconnect between that and my regular life. And ultimately, my guiding kind of ethos or philosophy was Nietzsche. One of Nietzsche's ideas is that you never want to sacrifice this world for the next world. You never want to trade in the here and now for some theoretical next life. And that just really spoke to me. Life is so precious. You don't want to spend it as a project trying to engineer something in the future. And then I got really into David Deutsch and Karl Popper. And the thing that really was amazing about that and amazing about epistemology, philosophy of science, philosophy of technology and the future and all those great things. But epistemology never really resonated as an important, practical, impactful kind of area of philosophy. And that is what I think is so incredible about Deutsch's work, The Beginning of Infinity in particular, is that it really brings us home about just how much it impacts every aspect of life, not just stuff about the future or technology, but even psychology, popular culture, current events, work-life balance, all of it. And of course, including children. And the application of this philosophy to child raising and parenthood and being a father and a family member has been just the most impactful bit of philosophy on my life, bar none. Just it absolutely towers above everything else. And that's just very exciting. It's very exciting to find some ideas and use them. And in this case, I think it's the main reason why I'm so happy with my relationship with my wife, absolutely, but also with my kids. And I can't think of anything that's more important than that rings into the top of the list If there's something wrong with my relationship with my wife, I can't concentrate at work. I can't. Everything is just has a little, I don't know, there's a little problem area going on. And in terms of the future of my life, my relationship with my kids will be probably the main thing for the rest of my days. I'll be 60, 70, 80, hopefully more. And so putting into that context, I guess that kind of rounds it out. I think that I'll stop there with that. The other thing is that when my wife was pregnant the last go round, she was feeling like she didn't have much energy. She's not getting a lot done at work. She was feeling like a waste. And I was building shelves and getting the house ready for the kids and stuff. And I was being all productive and she was not. And I was trying to say, you're building people. And these people will be here. The shelves that I built are going to decay, fall apart. Someone's going to make an addition onto this house. This house will get knocked down 100 years, 200 years hence. But these people and their children, like these ideas will just perpetuate just who knows how long. And I think we take that for granted. I think this is having kids is just an extraordinary product, extraordinarily productive. And having that work well means so much for just your own quality of life. And then, of course, all the stuff that they discover, big impactful things or even small things. It's just like, this is like the tip of the spear of the human experience. And this is living it. And it's very exciting. And it's very exciting to have a philosophy that speaks to this and gives a framework or a grounding.
Yeah, it's interesting that one thinks of like epistemology as perhaps like one of the least interesting, most armchair parts of philosophy. But then that's mostly because one never applies epistemology rigorously to one's own life, and actually it could really shape and change the relationships and the kind of like way that one even thinks about reality in the most fundamental ways. And so I really salute you for having done so. You want to
Thank you.
Well, that is actually rigorous at this. And I salute your wife, honestly. And I salute your kids for this too. Because it's no small feat, I'm sure. But let's get into it a little bit. For those that don't know, that haven't read the book, that don't know much about taking children to sleep, what is the core thesis of The Sovereign Child?
The core thesis is that children are full status people. And this is David Deutsch's, one of his big ideas is describing what personhood is. And the argument is that children meet the definition of personhood. They meet it fully. They're not pre-persons. They're not persons on the make. They are not potential people. They are right now full status people from the point of being babies right on up. And this really changes everything. The knee-jerk reaction to this is that, no, they're not. The knee-jerk reaction is you can't treat kids like mini adults. And that's true. They're different from adults in many ways, but people are different from each other in very many ways. And men are different than women. Big people are different than small people. And the list goes on of the ways that we're different. But what we've understood is that none of those differences matter in terms of what a person's moral status is. Their moral standing depends on their personhood and their agency and ownership of their own lives. Their sovereignty really hinges on their personhood, and everything else is part of the details of how we interact. Somebody who is disabled, we need to account for their disabilities when we interact with them, but they're no less of a person because of that. Someone who's a woman or a man or different skin colors, all those things are the details that obviously we can think about and we can account for, but we don't assume that we need to control other people's lives according to those factors. And the same thing applies to children. We don't have a justification for controlling children's lives just because they're smaller, they are ignorant, they are unskilled, they are dependent on us. All of those factors are incidental or parochial. They're important. I'm not saying we ignore them, but we still allow children to make their own decisions, be the authors of their own lives. And that's the challenge of being a parent, is how do you help somebody who's ignorant and helpless to nonetheless have as much control as they can and help them develop into being fully independent, skillful people.
That all sounds quite nice and normal on the outset of it. I think many people would nod along. So what's different? And if you apply this philosophy to your own life, like what's actually different? There's quite a few things that are different. And what I love about the book is that it starts off with very concrete things.
Yeah.
Apply these principles in your own life, and then afterwards it goes into the philosophy. So how does your life perhaps and your relationship with your kids look different than perhaps like the one that we find in like most traditional parental settings?
Yeah. I think my relationship with my kids, how our kids function in our house, someone comes to visit, it doesn't look all that different. In other words, they behave like regular kids by and large. My kids are, the oldest is 7. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and I have 2 1-year-olds. And what I describe in the book are the concrete things that we do that are different. And the major areas of control over kids, I would say, in a conventional family is you worry about what your kids eat, and you have to manage that. Just let them eat whatever they want. You have to manage how they sleep, and you have to manage what screens, how they use screens and whatnot. And of course, you have to get them into school, but the school kind of manages that. You got to try to tell them to do their homework and things like that, and drive them around. But those are the big areas. And so I describe those are very different for my kids. They don't go to school. They eat whatever they want. They sleep whenever they want, and they use iPads whenever they want. So that's the big difference. I think what the major point in the book is that most people assume that there's kind of 2 options for kids. There's either controlling them or letting them run free, or some mixture. I generally let them run free, but I control them in these certain crucial areas that I can't leave to chance. And that's what I'm trying to get through for the book, that there's the Deutsch's philosophy. Sarah Fitzclarence, the kind of co-founder of this movement called Taking Children Seriously, which I should introduce a little bit. These aren't my ideas. There's a whole parenting movement called Taking Children Seriously from the 90s and early 2000s that I'm reviving or reinvigorating, or basically writing a book about. But that kind of represents the Deutschian epistemology, Popperian epistemology applied to children, called Taking Children Seriously. And the one major hangup that this philosophy tries to shake people from is to step away from thinking about kids on this kind of spectrum of either total control or total permissiveness, or some combination of the two. And it tries to say, just drop that. Try not to address every question about kids by saying, do I permit this or not? Do I allow this or not? And instead, you look at it from a problem-solving perspective. And screens, it's really, what are the problems that come from using screens? And being very critical about the kind of conventional ideas about what the problems are. The conventional ideas that screens will rot their brains, screens will stunt their language, screens will have no ability to pay attention to things over a long term. And one thing I do is just wait for these problems to show up. These are very theoretical. And so my kids have had screens since they were 18 months old, and they have incredible vocabularies. They have very rich social lives with each other and with us. We're never competing with the screen for their attention. And, they don't seem to have fractured attention spans or anything like that. And that's the same approach you take to food. Let them eat what they want and wait for some problem to show up. They eat a lot of sugar, but does the sugar make them hyper? We don't notice it being hyper. And if sugar is making them hyper, what's so bad about that? Kids get hyper about all sorts of things. What's so bad about a hyper kid? And then if it is bad, if it is causing some sort of problem, then, is there a way we can solve this? And the problem-solving idea is to see what they're trying to get at from the sugar and see if we can supply that in a way that doesn't make them hyper. Are there delicious foods that they can eat that don't make them act strangely, or strange really isn't a problem, in ways that are harmful? I don't know. That was a lot, but
Yeah.
that's basically what we do. Go ahead.
Let's unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
I'm sure like one of the first questions that you might be getting is, okay, so how much are they using screens then, and what for? What do they do instead of school? And what do they actually eat? So if you could walk us like a little bit, how does your kids' like everyday life look like roughly? Or like, pick one of them, perhaps probably their everyday life look quite different.
Yeah.
And we can like maybe discuss like a specific concrete problem that arose and like how you dealt with it, rather than just the like strong cursive gateway.
Right. Yeah, my kids have had screens since they were very young. Like I said, about 18 months. Once they're grabbing our phones out of our hands and it became annoying. And obviously the phone is interesting, right? When an 18-month-old, anything that they're interested in, it's exciting that they're grabbing at stuff and holding stuff, and you want to feed that. And so it just felt very wrong to be fighting with this thing. This is obviously interesting. It's bright and makes sounds, and there's cartoons on it, and I obviously use it all day long. It's really interesting. Babies they just suck on to anything that you're doing. They're interested in it just because you're doing it. That's obviously a great thing, right? It's obviously a way to learn about the world. Is you could like this genetic idea that go toward whatever your mom or dad is doing and grab at it and pull on it. That's such a clearly adaptive idea. And so my kids have never had a period where they've had phones or tablets restricted. And I think a lot of parents worry that if you have a 7, 8, 10-year-old who's been restricted and you give them an iPad and with unfettered access to an iPad, that's going to be a very different experience than my kids, since they've never been restricted, then put it down all the time. It's easy. They prefer to talk with us than to almost watch anything on their screens. They kind of gravitate to the screens when there's a downtime. So in the morning when we wake up, they want to like start watching something. That's how they wake up. When they eat, they usually eat with a screen. And then we usually go on some sort of trip during the day, or the people that take care of my kids go on some sort of trip during the day. And they're in the car, they're talking to each other, they're running around wherever they're visiting. And when they come back in the afternoons, they usually have a wind down period and they're on their screens. But there's not much of a pattern to it. It varies from day to day. The older kids and the younger kids use them differently. My 7-year-old is spending less and less time. My 5-year-old, some days he'll be like 9, 10 hours on this thing. Sometimes he takes himself off, and he doesn't like other people all that much. And so he likes to go to be with himself and watch YouTube videos, often for hours at a time. But we just went on vacation this last week, and they hardly used their tablets. The 3 older kids hardly use the tablets at all. I don't think after the first day, they didn't even touch them. And their grandparents were there on vacation at the beach, and it's quite great. Their relationship with the screens is, I mean, they spend a lot of time, but they use them. They don't have any worrisome usage with them. They're not locked in. They're not possessive about them. It's easy to persuade them to do something else. They would prefer to do things with other people. That's a quick description of the screens.
I can say I've had a really great childhood and quite a permissive one, but not so about screens and food. And so now I'm totally addicted to sugar. It's very bad. And screens for the longest time, whenever I was over at a friend's house, all I did was like watch the screen. So I can see that part, like the fact that perhaps they're developing like immunity earlier and etc. And or like just like perhaps a more grown-up approach to screen time, etc. But then on the other hand, you have this argument from Jonathan Haidt, etc., that like, there are just a few things that are like these hyper stimuli that we haven't perhaps evolved to pass evolutionarily, and like kids specifically not, because rather than them having like fully fledged utility functions or like a fully fledged mind, they're still very much in the process of developing and shaping it, so that while perhaps adults can more be trusted with it because they understand trade-offs, the long-term development of their persona, long-term goals, kids might not yet. So I wonder what you say to that. I'm sure you get that argument all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But it would still be interesting.
Yes, there's so much there. The Jonathan Haidt book, I almost have to publish my own. I didn't mention him specifically in the chapter on screens, but there's so much to say about his arguments. Just picking up the points that you mentioned, this idea that the screens present a stimulus that we haven't evolved how to deal with. We're confronted with that all day long. Electricity presents a stimulus that we haven't evolved to deal with. Indoor air conditioning, and you can go on and on. Automobiles, speeds, planes, trains. Obviously, we can understand these things. That's the magic of being a human, is that we are not limited to, and this takes it back to the Deutschian philosophy, we are not constrained to the ideas that come with our genes. We are creative beings. The essence of personhood is that we can understand new things. We can create new ideas, new knowledge, and there's nothing that we can't come to understand. There's no stimulus that hijacks our brain and controls us. We are not controllable in that way. We are categorically different from all non-human animals. And so the arguments that apply to dogs and pigeons and rats do not apply to humans because we can figure stuff out. We're genetically programmed to be afraid of heights, and yet people enjoy skydiving. We find moldy food disgusting, but also we can find cheese to be exquisite. Moldy grapes, rotten grapes, the rest of it, right? We can use this stuff to preserve food, and we can develop a taste for all these things. We can become celibate. We can like hot sauce. So all of these things that are in our evolutionary past are grist for the mill for the human creative mind. And to treat a small human, a baby, a child, as if they are incapable of understanding these things until they reach some point when their frontal lobes are fully developed is absurd. Young kids can understand human language. All right. So boom, there you go. And that's extraordinary. And you've even met teenagers who are very mature, who have incredible restraint, right? Any teenager who excels at something can restrain themselves and knows when to can restrain their impulsivity. And the more you understand, that is your greatest hedge or guard or safety mechanism against impulsivity and reactiveness. Understanding is the magic sauce. And that's what the job of the parent is, to help the kid understand the world so they can manage these things on their own. And to shield them from the world necessitates that blunts their understanding. And that really is the chief mistake, is to say that you're not capable of understanding, right? So think about the messages that sends. You're not capable of understanding, so I'm going to take over for you. And that means that your desires to engage with this thing are misplaced and actually a little bit worrisome. And you need to be watched and carefully minded. And you really can't trust yourself because you can get yourself into trouble, right? You're going to eat the wrong stuff and you're going to look at the wrong stuff on the screen. And so I don't trust you, and you shouldn't really trust yourself either until what? You get big enough, right? You got to teach them eventually. How are they going to learn? So we want to shield them until they're adults and then dump them into a world of abundance and let them figure it out themselves on their own? Or do we want to start everything off in the beginning? I want to start it off in the beginning. And my job is, you're a 3-year-old and you want to climb up on something that's dangerous. It doesn't mean I just say, okay, I'm going to let you climb. How can I help you climb on this thing in a way that's not going to be dangerous? Why don't I get in there with you and I'll catch you if you fall, or I'll put some padding on the floor, or right? My creative mind can start working on figuring out a way for you, the child, to engage with whatever it is in a way that's not going to get you hurt, but does not involve me controlling the situation.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because you and Jonathan agree to definitely on a lot, I think, in terms of the uncoddling of the American mind.
So
on
yes.
some regard. And I do think that it's ridiculous that we think like with 18 or 21, suddenly we reach this magical threshold after which we are fully grown human, and suddenly we get very much from a world of constraints into a world of no constraints.
Right.
That sounds totally misguided, but I am curious because yours is like a deeper philosophical conviction, and this conviction is shared by a few. I know a few people that really share the Popperian, Deutschian notions of using reasons and explanations, and those people are really quite sincere about applying that to their real lives. But for the average parents, it might be really difficult to engage in distinct problem solving.
Yep.
Each individual situation that arises. Is there any tip on like how one could develop that creativity or that relationship with a child to make that be a fruitful process?
Yeah.
Great in theory, but in a scenario, in an emergency situation, what do you do?
In an emergency situation, you don't have time. And I'll often
in a situation where they want to climb a tree and you're like, okay, this is possibly too dangerous, or
get them out of the tree. If you're worried about your kid getting hurt or something like that, just grab them. That's what I say. I take over. But it doesn't mean that's what tends to happen is a rule gets formed. No running in the street, no climbing on the tree. And that's really a quick, easy way out. People accuse me of being like lazy, my philosophy being lazy, but I think invoking rules is lazy. It's just saying, okay, I'm going to make the rule that you can't go in the street. That's how we solve this problem. Really, for me, it doesn't solve the problem for you. You still want to play in the street. But for me, it's solved. And to enforce the rule, I'll bring in consequences. And now I become this gatekeeper. I become this adversary to the fun thing that you want to do. And now you, the child, have reason to try to deceive me because you are a creative being, right? And so when people are constrained, they try to think about ways around constraints. And then this damages our relationship, right? I become this adversary. And to be effective at setting rules, I have to be consistent with my consequences. I have to be emotionally distant from you. And I'm just going to lay down the law to make sure that you don't go in the street because it's my job to preserve your safety and blah, 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 the whole thing. Anyway, what I'm saying is one thing parents can do is just to recognize that every rule, that there is an alternative. There is an alternative to every rule that gets the kid what the kid is after and also satisfies whatever concerns the adult has in terms of safety or health or whatever else it is. And there's no algorithm for this. There's no recipe for this because it is creative problem solving. It's very context dependent on whatever's going on. But I would just say as a simple kind of entry into the philosophy is just to consider, give yourself 60 seconds when you're thinking that you need to apply a rule, give yourself 60 seconds to see if you can think up some alternative. If the kid is climbing up on something, kids are playing in the living room and the glass coffee table is there, right? Is there a way that they can still play and do what they want to do, but I don't worry about them getting hurt? So maybe I could just push the coffee table out of the way. Is it so bad? Kids eating on the couch. I don't like cleaning the couch. You spend money on furniture. I bought this waterproof blanket and just put the waterproof blanket on the couch and now you can spill whatever it is and I can throw that thing in the wash. And getting kids to eat's a pain in the butt, right? If they want to eat on the couch while they watch TV, I like that. That's a nice way to eat. And so it's anyway, for each of those things where you get worried, like, oh, they're drawing on the wall. It's maybe I can get them some markers that are easy to wash off, right? And they really like drawing on the wall. Or maybe you can paint that dry erase. There's a dry erase coating you can paint on a wall and get them some dry erase markers. There's just, once your mind starts traveling down this road of maybe, can I figure out what I call, or what are called win-win solutions? Can I figure out a solution that's a win for the kid, that enables them to get what they're after and works for me as well? Like my kids running out into the street. Well, maybe they want to be chased. Here, I'll chase you around in the backyard. What is appealing about the street for this kid, and how do I make that available to them in a way that doesn't involve cars? That's really it. I think if you just, every time you're going to apply a rule, just bake in some time to think up an alternative and try that out. And if it fails, fine. But then at least you failed by thinking up a new idea, and then you can think up something different the next time.
You've almost falsified the theory that
there you go. And what I found really exciting about this when I started is that, getting philosophical, failure is inevitable, right? Mistakes are inevitable. And so what rules do is they bake in failures. They guarantee that we're going to fail the same way every single time, and we're not going to make any progress. Whereas trying out new things, that's going to often fail as well, but not every time. And when it succeeds, it can succeed. That problem can be solved indefinitely. Getting sunscreen on my daughter, she didn't like sunscreen, and basically I was able to show her that she liked using bug spray. She understood mosquito bites are no good and using bug spray, and I was able to show her that the sunscreen prevents sunburns, and she started applying it herself. And I solved that little fight. And it could have said, I can't allow you to damage your skin, right? It's a rule, and you have to wear the sunscreen or we're not going to go out to the park. But by getting this explanation across in a way that she accepted, that sunscreen problem has been solved. And so when you do get a solution, it can work for the rest of your life. And parenthood can be a process of discovery, is so much more fun. And knowledge, it's edifying for the kid. It builds their understanding of the world. It's more fun for you. It builds your understanding of the world. And it avoids all of those problems that come with rules, being the gatekeeper, being the punisher, being the consequence person, being the judge, being the watchful eye. You get rid of all of those things when you're doing creative problem solving. And I think that's the real magic.
Yeah, it does feel like you're instilling the capability of them to solve their own problems further down the road, also massively relieving yourself of having to do so for the rest of their lives and having
Yeah.
to. And but I think it's very similar to like when humans, as you grow into an organization, if you onboard more junior employees, how much are you going to do through specific rules or through micromanagement versus how much are you going to enable them to thrive, making your life on the long term much easier.
Oh yeah.
And but I think maybe my last question for this first more practical session is we've talked a lot about the potential like benefits versus trade-offs of doing it this way or of doing it the other way, and that it's actually not even that bad for the child to do it this way. Like possibly the screen time, yeah, that can be solved in a different way, or like maybe they even develop like a better approach to screen time, same for food, etc. But I think or at least as I had understood it from a philosophical perspective, the argument is almost stronger. And this is like this kind of fundamental claim that it's not really about calculating the benefits and costs of this or
Oh,
that approach, because it's not like when I interact with you that like one way of treating you might be fine if only brings the better consequences about. You are a
right.
human being, and that's why I treat you the way that you deserve, which is as a human being. And even if this approach of taking children seriously and the sovereign child is harder on the short term, even if it does come with real costs. And I think you're not even trying to whitewash these costs. Like
Right.
it's the right thing to do because we're
Yes.
human beings. And I think that's yeah. If you want to, perhaps I would love to close my part of this podcast out by like you sharing a bit more about that because I thought that was actually like beautiful. It's a really deep way of understanding our relationship to kids and what it actually means to be in relationship to other human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we get this intuitively with our adult relationships, right? With our spouses or friends or siblings. You don't interact. Imagine if somebody was interacting with you in order to achieve some outcome, right? Imagine how dry, stale, stilted, and a little offensive that would be, right? If I said to my brother, I'm going to interact with you in your 20s in such a way that I'm going to maximize how well your 30s go, right? It would be condescending to say that I know what's best for you in your future life better than you do. But it's also just dehumanizing to say that I don't care about you right now. I only care about you in the future. We recognize that's a mistake in our relationships, and that simply being with another person on their own terms is it's not just more moral, it's a better way to be with another person. And we treat childhood as this period of life where our relationship with you is nice, but it's secondary. What's most important is that I achieve certain outcomes for you in your 20s. It's sad. And then philosophically, what's wrong with it? It's not accounting for them as a person. And that's what's nice in relationships. It's being with other people as people. I don't know how to, it's a very subtle point. And one way of getting at it is that people ask me for the evidence for this all the time, right? And what kids have been raised this way and how have they turned out? And I do care about how my kids turn out, right? It's not that I don't care about the outcomes, but I don't control those outcomes. I want my kids to be happy. I want them to be independent. I want them to be flourishing in some way, productive in some way, to use their creative energies in some way. But I can't make them be happy, right? If we had a recipe for this, that book would have sold out a long time ago. You cannot make another person happy. You can't make yourself happy. We know that it's a mistake to try to, a lot of people get married, right? They're seeking a boyfriend or a girlfriend to make them happy. And the wisdom is that's not going to work. Another person's not going to make you happy. So how's a parent going to make a kid happy? And how do you make yourself happy? We don't know how to do this. So this can't be forced. It's something that a person must discover on their own. And the other thing is the best way to make my kids happy, like, why don't I make them happy now? Right? If I want them to be happy in their 20s, how about we'll make them happy when they're 5? And then hopefully that continues. And what makes them happy is exercising their own freedom. That's crucial. Take away somebody's freedom and they're pretty much not going to be happy. I would say the same thing about another argument is that let's say you did have certain outcomes, right? What would they be? What would we care about? If we had two groups of people, one raised my way and one raised the conventional way, How would you measure these two groups to see how they turned out? How would you measure their happiness? Right there, that's not going to happen because we don't have a measurement for happiness. Would you measure their financial success? Obviously, there's big problems with that. There's plenty of people that are very successful that are broken on the inside and live miserable lives that I would never want my kids to have, and certainly not myself. How do you assess somebody's inner life? How do you assess their satisfaction? We don't know what these things are. So it's quite funny that we want these things become the justification for controlling our kids, yet these are the mysteries of life. What is satisfaction? What is a meaningful life? You know, that you can't control something that you don't even know. You don't even know how to make it for yourself. So it is quite nice. Managing somebody else is brutal. Just being with them is sublime. And being with a kid is just your own kid. Wow. There's so many times I'm just sitting on the couch with my kid on their iPad and I'm on my phone on Twitter and just, I'm happy, he's happy, this is great. And he wants an ice cream and he goes and gets an ice cream. This is great.
Well, I'm excited for trying some of that stuff out myself in 6 weeks and seeing how it goes. But for now, I would love to perhaps hand it over to Beatrice to tackle a little bit more. Okay, if we think about this from an existential hope perspective, which is the purpose of the podcast, what are the kind of like larger scale implications of this? Like, how can we think about a future and in which perhaps it's not like a few people that are raising their kids like this, but in which it's a little bit more common. Bea, take over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for all of this. This was very new to me, I should say. I wasn't familiar so much with taking children seriously and all of this. And so, yeah, it was very interesting to dive into this world. One thing that I was just wondering about before we dive into it relates to this sort of grander vision. Because one of the things that I was thinking about when I dove into this was, does it scale? Because you obviously need so much time and resources to be able to do this. And that's what I would imagine as like the common pushback, that most people don't have time for this. But I also heard the other day, which I thought was interesting, that dads today spend more time with their kids than parents overall did, like in the 70s, like the mom and the dad. So it seems to be a trajectory that we're going in. I would be interested in exploring it as a bit of if we envision this maybe is the trend already, and then like we have a more maybe radically different future. Maybe everyone has UBI, and this is what we'll want to spend our this will be like our meaningful activity, really, that we like. Really, how can we do the best job ever of raising our children?
Sure.
So yeah, let's dive into that. Do you have any thoughts on if you think about really what's the best case scenario of how this would scale, or like a future where we're really trying this basically as a society?
Right. Yeah, a common objection is that I'm a physician, my wife is a physician, we have plenty of money, and we hire people to take care of our kids during the day instead of go to school. And the argument is that not everybody can do that. And yes and no. Just in terms of the homeschooling part of this, there are lots of families that don't have a lot of money. I know several of them that homeschool their kids. Traditionally, or typically in the US, homeschooling is largely done by, in the past anyway, to a large degree, a big chunk of the homeschooling population are evangelical Christians, or not even evangelical, religious families. And they often without a lot of money, but they have a strong commitment to the ideas, right? They don't want their kids in the public school for various reasons, and they figure out a way to make it work. And this is not uncommon in the past, and it's still totally possible to do today. What is difficult is to maintain the priorities that a household has now in terms of the amount of money that they have to spend on luxury items, et cetera. It's hard to maintain that, especially living in a city or an urban environment where the housing costs are very high. And to say, okay, in this environment, I'm going to maintain my quality of life and have my kids be home during the day. That would be hard. But, if these ideas are important, it is absolutely possible to restructure one's life and restructure one's priorities to be able to afford it. So I don't think that objection really holds at all. The other part of the big picture thing is scaling this. The thing is that kids today, I'd say probably one of the biggest loads, one of the biggest blocks of productivity and progress is how we warehouse children. There are, especially in their teenage years, they are very productive. and they spend all day in school doing zero productivity, negative productivity, because they're learning harmful ideas in many cases. And if we were able to eliminate compulsory schooling, then the incentive for people to provide basically daycare explodes, right? And now you have a huge market for people who provide engaging, fun things for kids to do during the day that parents don't have to provide themselves. We don't see that now because all those potentials are competing with compulsory school. So if you wanted to open up a music academy, you got to compete with school. If you want to open up a sports club, or you name it, makerspace, any kind of programming, coding, on and on, all these things that kids are interested in. And the adults in our society right now that have the interest and would, for free, would be happy to apprentice kids, teach kids, all of the opportunities you have for businesses to basically apprentice kids. They would suddenly, not only would their parents not have to take care of them at home, but they can be productive apprentices and gaining job skills, job training, building up a savings instead of student loan debt. They're building up a savings. They're learning how to go to work, how to clock in and clock out, how to be a team player, how to be a team member, etc., how to use whatever technology, on and on. Kids could actually be growing their capacities during their childhood years instead of just being right now as a drain. They're warehoused in schools. There's an enormous number of adults that have to take care of them. Those adults could be doing productive things. So I think this scales very easily if we were able to remove this set of ideas that thinks that kids need to be controlled. The collective myth that we're living under, the collective fantasy, is that kids need to be placed in a simulation environment, not the real world environment. They have to be placed in a simulation, and they have to be trained up in that simulation until they're 18. And then they have sufficient skills in the simulation to actually do the real world, which is insane. Go ahead.
This is interesting because I remember I listened to your interview on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and you had this, I think there was someone had a shock. Oh, I'm from Sweden, basically. And you were like, oh, people aren't allowed to be homeschooled in Sweden. And I was like, well, isn't it pretty good if we're like sharing the same simulation? That's something that I often appreciate, that like we have a shared experience of reality, or like a shared understanding of reality. And so it's also that balance of like collective interest versus the individual's interest. And so that would also just be really interesting to hear if you think of, do you think that is there a trade-off to be made there between like collective interest and individual interest? And just curious.
No, I don't think there's a trade-off. I think it's similar to, there are only individual interests. There is no collective interest. The collective interest is the collection of individual interests. And often some of the worst harms that have been perpetrated have been getting the wrong collective interest and forcing individuals to conform to these collective interests. Culture is important. Culture is crucial. Cultural norms are important. But it's important that a kid embrace having a shared experience and a shared set of norms is very important. I agree with you completely, but these need to be voluntary. And it's when kids are forced to engage with these cultural norms that we produce problems. Adults are not forced to engage with cultural norms. Adults can stay home. And if an adult was forced to engage with going to a festival in town, going to some religious ceremony, going to a sports event, right? That would be, if you make the argument, we need to have this shared experience, it's better for the collective good, a person would rightly object and say, I decide what is best for my day, and I decide which collective experiences I want to participate in. And when you have the freedom to opt out of any given collective experience, that makes the ones that you do engage with are all meaningful. You understand them, they have value for you as a person, and that's what makes them so great. I think they are great, but they're only great if you understand what they're for. And Scientology, right? Scientologists could say that they find it very valuable to have this shared set of ideas, but it's a bad set of ideas. No offense to Scientologists. Maoists it's very important to have this shared sense of ideas of Maoist China or Stalinist Russia, etc. And it's easy to make that argument that the collective good outweighs the individual good, even in some sort of trade-off or mixture. And I really think no. Adults can opt out of things. Kids should be able to opt out of things also, for the very reason that I want them to enjoy and take seriously and find meaningful the collective things that they do engage with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think there's probably a bit of a cultural difference because in my experience, my individual interest has just benefited hugely from these sort of collective systems. And if I think about the social class that I was born into in a very rich country, I think in any other country in the world, I would just not have had access to the opportunities that I've had. And so to me, it's not such a black and white thing.
So I agree. But if you took, let's just take school, right? A school is a ladder for career advancement, et cetera. We all know this, right? You go to school, you go to college, graduate school, you get degrees, you get training, specialize, and you get access to a high-paying job, et cetera. I benefited from that enormously, but you don't have to force it. That can all remain in place, and simply allow kids to opt out and chart. Some people don't like to do that, right? Some people want to chart their own course. Some people are loners. Some people are very individualistic. Some people love that stuff. And so I think you can make it all available. You just don't have to force it.
That's very good.
In fact, I think it works better that way because the kids that really want to do the collective stuff don't have to deal with the kids that are rebelling. And the teacher doesn't have to sit there and try to make the kid that doesn't want to be there conform. I was a middle school, high school science teacher. There was only 4 kids that are actually interested in what I'm saying at any given time, at the most. And so everybody else who's forced to be there is a cost on those 4 kids.
Yeah, that I can attest to. I was a substitute teacher for a while as well. And that was, there were some kids that didn't and shouldn't have been there. I do want to take it to this bigger positive.
Yeah, let's go big.
Yeah. If you think, for example, we always ask this actually, what would be like a major positive event that you think could really shift this Overton window or could really make this thing happen and go global? What do you think that could be? Like if we had a global paradigm shift in how we raise our kids, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I'm talking about is a massive change. So it's hard to imagine if you think about like other paradigm shifts that have happened, usually they center around some invention of technology. And I think a simple thing is school choice. In the US, that's a big political movement. I don't know what that looks like in Europe or other developed nations, but the school choice movement is it's gaining a lot of ground here in the US. And like I said, that is one kind of discrete change that school could be made non-compulsory. And I think that would have extraordinary benefit. What would those benefits look like? I could speculate about that, but just thinking about the things that could cause the change, I think it's basically some technology and making school non-compulsory. It's nice because you don't have to eradicate school. You don't have to create some alternate system overnight. You just simply make it non-compulsory. It's still there for families that need to use school for childcare, et cetera. It's still there for various accreditation reasons, et cetera. It's just once it's non-compulsory, now you really have created a market for all those kids that don't need to go to school or want to go to school, can now be engaging in other things, other more productive things. Society can start to see that, wow, teenagers can have jobs and can do interesting things and can create their own careers and their own pathways. And then the technology part, I really think what's happening is that the screens, the digital tools are getting so good that the opportunity cost of being in social studies class is really becoming glaringly obvious. There are so many YouTubers that can teach whatever content is being taught in school 1,000 times better. That in the 1850s, when you had an agrarian society, the only way to get exposed to chemistry was to go to the schoolhouse. And otherwise, you're not going to learn any chemistry. But now, being in the schoolhouse and learning chemistry is so impoverished compared to the digital means of teaching chemistry and the teachers that are available online. And it's not just the people, it's the apps, it's the AIs, it's really pretty incredible. And so I think affluent parents are going to start being upset about their kids being stuck in class, even if they're in a fancy private school. They're going to feel like their kids are missing out. And kids who are exempt from that and are able to spend their time with the best digital teachers and digital teaching tools available and are doing incredible stuff, I think that's going to change a lot of minds. And they're going to have this kind of maybe an exodus from brick and mortar schools into locations that still provide safety for kids, right? They need to go somewhere during the day. They need to get out of the house, be with their friends, be with other people, have food available, warm, dry, safe environment, but the content that they're consuming is online in some way. I think I like the analogy is to sports, like professional sports. Only a very few people make a lot of money playing sports, and everybody else who's playing sports is a hobbyist by and large. And I think it's the same way with teaching, right? People who teach are hobbyists, and then the very best teachers in the world are the ones that people actually pay to get taught by. And those teachers would just need a massive distribution system. So you need online education, digital education. So that's my idea of the future. And I think that if we can unlock kids from school, that would be if I was going to guess what a paradigm shift would look like.
Yeah, the big school exodus. That's I think it's a very catchy title of this. And so then I think you've already mentioned it, but is there anything other than AI tutoring or something like that you're excited about in terms of like emerging tools or technologies that we would have access to that could help make this shift happen?
Not in particular. I'm not a big, I don't know. I think just the general ecosystem of tools is the diversity, right? The number of different things that can happen on an iPad is incredible. These things get demonized so sadly, but these, like, you didn't have consumer products that are so customizable. Like before iPads and mobile screens, you had to buy a gaming console, you had to buy a car, a bicycle. Like to have a mass audience, they have to be very similar. Whereas with a tablet, you can make this thing do so many different things. I don't know. It feels inevitable. I think that the Jonathan Haidt argument and a lot of the worries is that the tablet is a race to the bottom. This idea that the stuff that's being produced is cheap and unfulfilling and unstimulating and degrades kids' cognitive abilities and degrades their emotional abilities. And I see it as the opposite. I think these things are just, the story of human endeavor and kids, the story is ever more complex. We started with blocks and wooden puzzles, and now it's really hard to get kids to play with blocks and wooden puzzles. And it's the things that they have available now are just so much richer. And I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know what the big things are going to be, but I think that's going to keep on progressing. And just YouTube alone, YouTube is extraordinary. What's on that thing compared to school? It's just, I watched a thing the other day on the scale of time. This is how many different YouTube videos are there about the scale of time? What a fascinating concept. And YouTube can teach this in a way that's so much more engaging. And YouTube has all of the algorithm is spitting out related things about time and space, and it's all there. So I don't know. I just think that trend's going to keep on going. Will there be a tipping point? Will there be a moment? Will there be a breakthrough technology? Will it be AI? That's speculation, and I love people who have ideas about this. It's fun to listen to.
Yeah.
I think it's surprising, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this is such a good investment in general right now, and maybe many people are like really uncertain what the future will look like. So the like brick and mortar way of raising kids probably is is almost pretty unlikely to be the best way to prepare for the future that we're heading towards. So it's it's really
it's interesting that it's persisted the way it has for so long, right? I think the bigger question is, why is school so similar to how it's always been? Like, you look at things that have changed, and then it's things that stand out that are so similar. Medicine, I work in medicine. It's remarkably similar. It's remarkably resistant to change. And you ask, why is that? There's certain ideas around children that are incredibly strong, incredibly powerful, incredibly durable, and how to change them is a great question. It'll be big. Whatever changes these ideas around kids will be big. It'll probably be a bunch of small incremental.
Yeah. I think and hope that this episode, I really think that a lot of people are thinking about these things now in terms of, if you have kids, how are you going to raise them? Because it feels like the future feels very uncertain. So I think that this book is really a good, just like, inspiration for people. And another thing that I was thinking of just when you were talking about the screens and stuff is a metaphor that I've heard people use that I find very helpful, is that it's like, the screen time is like food. There's healthy food, there's like unhealthy food, and you should maybe have more of the healthy and less of the unhealthy, but it doesn't mean that it's not all the same, or it's not all equal. But we're out of time, but this was really interesting. I love this episode. Very excited to share it with people, and thank you so much for joining us and for writing the book, and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. This is real fun.